Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together for our opportunity to immerse ourselves in not only the words of Torah, but in the relationships of Torah. I want to begin by thanking everyone for their kindnesses during the past month. It was just about a month ago that Mom fell and broke her femur, and she went into the hospital. She was in the hospital for 3 weeks. We had hoped that she'd be able to undergo surgery to have her broken bone fixed and would be able to return home. However, she wasn't able to do that, and she received a wonderful palliative care in the hospital, and then died very, very peacefully and comfortably surrounded by her family. We had a funeral for her on the 29th of September. She died on the 27th. And then my sister and I went into Shiva in our mother's apartment. And one of the rituals of Shiva is to have a candle that burns 24 hours a day for 7 days. And while that candle was burning, every once in a while, I just would pass by it and I say, "Hi, Mom," and have a little conversation. And then on the 7th day, it went out. And when it went out, I turned to my sister and I said, "Vicky, the light has gone out. You and I are now officially bearers of the light." And so it makes it so much easier to do when one is part of a community of compassion and caring and support and love. So I'm very grateful to all of you for helping to make that kind of a community for me and my family. I also want to thank Cantor Mark Thompson very much for leading sessions while I was in New York, being with Mom, and I saw his wonderful materials, and I know he provided a wonderful provocative setting for interesting conversations and discussions. So Mark, thank you very much for being a leader within this community and for leading those discussions. Thank you. So we are in the holiday of Sukkot, and because it's a holiday, there are special Torah readings that we do. And what we're going to be looking at this evening is the Torah reading that will be done on this Shabbat, which it's what we call the Shabbat of Chol HaMoed Sukkot, the Shabbat during the intervening days of the holiday of Sukkot. So what we'll be reading from is the book of Exodus, chapter 33. We're going to start with verse 12, and we're going to go through chapter 34, verse 26. And in the course of it, maybe perhaps give some thought as to why these particular chapters, why these verses were selected for the Shabbat of Sukkot. And to begin, we'll have the opportunity for together saying our blessing and giving thanks for this moment. Baruch
atah Adonai melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Let me share with you the opening verses of our portion, starting at chapter 33, verse 12. Moses said to Adonai, "See, you say to me, lead this people forward, but you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. Further, you have said, I have singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor. Now, if I have truly gained your favor, pray let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider too that this nation is your people." Richard, would you like to read a little bit, starting in verse 14?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. And he said, "I will go in the lead and will lighten your burden. And he said to him, unless you go and leave, do not make us leave this place. For how would it be known that I have gained your favor, I and your people, unless you go with us, that we may be distinguished, I and your people, from every people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said unto Moses, I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name. He said, oh, let me behold your presence. And he answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you as I proclaim the name Lord before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and show compassion to whom I will show compassion. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for man may not see me and live. And the Lord said, see, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen.
Thank you. And Kath, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 34?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The Lord said to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablet the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered. Be ready by morning, and in the morning come up to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one else shall come up with you, and no one else shall be seen anywhere on the mountain. Neither shall the flocks and the herds graze at the foot of this mountain.
Thank you, Kath. June, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 4?
Thank you, Rabbi. So Moses carved 2 tablets of stone like the first, and early in the morning he went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, taking the 2 stone tablets with him. The Lord came down in a cloud. He stood with him there and proclaimed the name Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet he does not remit all punishment, but visits the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children, upon the 3rd and 4th generations.
Thank you, June. And Mark Thompson, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 8?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Moses hastened to bow low to the ground in homage and said, if I have gained your favor, O Lord, pray let the Lord go in our midst, even though this is a stiff-necked people. Pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your own. He said, I hereby make a covenant. Before all your people, I will work such wonders as have not been wrought on all the earth or in any nation. And all the people who are with you shall see how awesome are the Lord's deeds, which I will perform for you. Mark well what I command you this day. I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Beware of making a covenant with the inhabitants of the land against which you are advancing, lest they be a snare in your midst. No, you must tear down their altars, smash their pillars, and cut down their sacred posts. For you must not worship any other God, because the Lord, whose name is an impassioned God. You must not make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, for they will lust after their gods and sacrifice to their gods and invite you, and you will eat of their sacrifices. And when you take wives from among their daughters for your sons, their daughters will lust after their gods and will cause your sons to lust after their gods.
Thank you, Mark.
You shall.
And let me invite Robin to, if you'd like to read a little bit, starting at verse 17.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. You shall not make molten gods for yourselves. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, eating unleavened bread for 7 days, as I have commanded you. At the set time of the month of Abib. For in the month of Abib you went forth from Egypt. Every first issue of the womb is mine. From all your livestock that drop, a male as firstling, whether cattle or sheep. But the firstling of an ass you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck, and you must redeem every male firstborn among your children. None shall appear before me empty-handed.
Thank you, Robin. Let me invite Michael. Would you like to read a little bit there, starting at verse 21?
Yeah. 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh day you shall cease. In plow time and in harvest you shall cease, and a festival of weeks you shall make for yourselves. First fruits of the harvest of wheat, and a festival of ingathering at the turn of the year. 3 times in the year all your males shall appear in the presence of the Master, the Lord God of Israel. For I will dispossess nations before you, and I will widen your territory, and no man will covet your land when you go up to appear in the presence of the Lord 3 times in the year. You shall not slaughter with leavened stuff the blood of my sacrifice, nor shall the sacrifice of the festival of Passover be left till the morning. The best of the first fruit of your soil you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid at its mother's milk.
Thank you so much. And that is the portion for this Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot. So I'd like to share with you a little bit of a focused study. If you have a study sheet, I invite you to take it out at this time. Before we delve into what I prepared, let me just throw out, I'm kind of curious, what we've just read. Why do you think, of all the different portions that one could choose from in all of Torah, why do you think these 2 chapters, or verses from these 2 chapters, are the ones that we're reading in the Shabbat in the middle of Sukkot? What about it is relevant to the holiday of Sukkot?
What mentions it?
Tell me more about that. Yeah.
So it mentions the festival of weeks,
Uh-huh.
and it says how you shall observe it. And it also mentions many of the other holidays and how we are to observe them as well.
Yeah. So, and which of these is the reference exactly to the holiday of Sukkot?
Isn't the festival of weeks, isn't that the fruits of the harvest? Isn't that Sukkot?
Well, I think that might be a Shavuot. It might be Shavuot, yeah.
They are in the desert. They are experiencing a sense of being in the wilderness, which is like being in the Sukkot. I mean, that's the spirit, and it is a kind of console. It brings all the rules together. A lot of the big rules.
It brings everything together, and the reference in particular, you've got the right verse, Susan. It's in 22, and it's that second part where it says the Hag HaAsif, which translated here is the feast of the ingathering at the turn of the year. So that seems to be what's being referred to here as Sukkot. Anything else about the nature of these verses that we've read tonight that makes me think, yeah, Richard?
Well, there are 3 of them, and everybody has to go.
Uh-huh.
Everybody has to go or to present themselves. It's an entire team effort. There's one God, and there's the rest of us all charged to do the same thing, to work together to get in crops, whatever it is. But this is it's nothing that can be done by any one person.
Mm-hmm.
The community has to do it all.
Yeah. Okay. Anna?
Well, I think that kind of sums it up in a nutshell. All of these verses seem to me to be instructing or edifying us one with the other or with God. And we know that it's a mitzvah to have guests in your sukkah. And we know that the patriarchs, we welcome all them in the sukkah. And these verses seem to just encapsulate a whole lot of everything for the
Lovely.
sukkah.
Okay,
You
lovely.
can eat in the sukkah of these verses.
Right.
There's no roof between you and God, so to speak.
Okay. And let me go back to Susan. Go ahead and unmute and share with us. Yeah.
Oh, I was struck when it talks about God making a covenant with the people,
Mhm.
because and sealing a covenant, because that we've just finished the high holy days, and Sukkot is like the final piece of that. In fact, I think that that perhaps it's believed that the gates open one last time on Simchat. Is it Simchat Torah or Shemini Atzeret? Whichever, I don't remember which one. I think it's Shemini Atzeret. And so it kind of is talking about God's relationship to us and our relationship to God in terms of behavior and how we need to observe him.
So you see Sukkot is kind of a culmination of the high holy days. Okay, very nice. Okay. Anyone else about why we're reading these particular verses during Sukkot? Okay. So it's very interesting in terms of the order in which these chapters of Exodus are appearing, because if you remember, before we get to this portion, there's already been an instruction from God to build a Mishkan. And then we have this incident with the golden calf that kind of interrupts this description of building a Mishkan. And then eventually, after this incident with the golden calf and Moses returning back up to the mountain, gaining a second set of tablets, bringing them back down, then there's a return to a description of the building of the Mishkan. Rashi, on the other hand, says something very interesting. He says all that is out of place. He says that's not the order in which things actually happened. It may be the order in which the book presents it, but it's not the order in which things happen. And he suggests that the pronouncement from God about building a Mishkan actually happens after the incident with the golden calf. That there's some kind of recognition that the people need both some kind of common project in order to unify themselves and their relationship with God, and that they need some kind of structure in which to cohere themselves and their relationship with God. So that notion of needing a structure, of needing some kind of shelter, maybe that also ties in with what's happening during Sukkot, the recognition of engaging in a building project in order to create some kind of structure, which is not necessarily a physical structure, but is a spiritual structure that allows us to cohere not only with one another, but to cohere with God. So we're going to explore that a little bit as we go through our study sheet. So I have entitled this study sheet "At the Threshold of Homecoming." And I'd like to focus on a verse that we read, which is from chapter 33, verse 18, where Moses is now, has come down from the mountain after receiving these first set of the tablets, and he's encountered the people who have built the golden calf, and he's interceded on their behalf with God to please forgive them. And now Moses is now crying out to God. And here in verse 18, Moses says, "Oh, let me behold your presence." There's this, after all this time, after having already been up on the mountain, apparently, after having encountered some presence at the burning bush some long time ago now, still Moses cries out, I need to behold your presence. And this notion that Moses somehow needs, as someone who has been commissioned to go on a quest, to go on a mission by God, wants now to behold the presence of the sovereign who has commissioned him. Makes a lot of sense in terms of Moses's own biography. I mean, because Moses grew up in a palace where a sovereign issued life and death orders, a sovereign who had full sway over his community, a sovereign who could tell people what they had to do, who would send people on missions, who would give people projects to do. So in a sense, maybe Moses is kind of, that's his framework. If I'm going to be commissioned to go on this quest of leading this people, I need to kneel before you. I need to experience your presence. And so the response is going to be somewhat confounding, perhaps a little bit, to not only Moses, but perhaps to us as well, in terms of what this sovereign is going to respond. And the sovereign is going to say, well, you're not going to get to see me. What you're going to experience, let's work up to this. Here is Moses, who is desperate to experience the presence of God. And that notion of desperately wanting to experience the presence of God crops up time and time again in our literature. And sometimes it's out of a sense of ecstasy, and oftentimes it's out of a sense of estrangement, a sense of separation, a sense of, I need to contact you because I need to have some sense of contact with you. I need to have some sense of your existence. And that sense of separation and of perhaps even feeling apart from, perhaps even feeling separated from, crops up time and time again. And here we have in number 2 from Psalm 22, the voice of the psalmist cries out, my God, why have you abandoned me? And of course, this is a famous refrain, not only in our literature, also in the literature of other faiths. This is what Jesus says when Jesus is on the cross. My God, why have you abandoned me? What's interesting about Psalm 22 is that it starts off with this expression of abandonment, but quickly works its way through to a sense of the presence of God. And then we have Psalm 27, which in its early verses says, the psalmist says, do not hide your face from me. Do not forsake me. Do not abandon me. Again, the voice of the psalmist starts out with a sense of separation, of despair, maybe even of abandonment. And yet very quickly, after having expressed all that, the psalmist begins to give praise to God and ends the psalm with words saying, everyone, look to God, be strong and of good courage. So somehow the psalmist has worked through this sense of being apart from God, and is now encouraging others to feel the sense of strength and power of the presence of God. So here is in number 3, the answer that God gives to Moses, who says, let me behold your presence. God answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name Yud He Vav He, and the grace that I grant, and the compassion that I show. But you cannot see my face. So what intrigued me was that when I read this, first of all, when I proclaim before you the name Yud He Vav He, as we've talked in other sessions, this 4-letter word that gets translated often as Adonai, or another word for God, all those being nouns that Yud Hey Vav Hey is actually some form of the verb to be. And so rather than being a noun, something that's static and well-defined, we discover here that God is actually action. God is actually dynamic. God is a verb in motion, if you will. And so immediately after this expression of I'm a verb, or I am verbness, or I am beingness, having beenness and will beiness, then the voice says, what you'll experience will be the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. In other words, what you will experience will be my beingness, my action, not my rigid and well-defined presence. You'll experience what I do. And there seems to be some kind of lesson that's being transmitted here to Moses as well, which is perhaps what's been constructed, this notion of what's been constructed in terms of the calf is an attempt out of fear and anxiety and a sense of separation from Moses and perhaps also from God. People need to construct something that stands still, that they can touch, that they can define by shape and presence. And the message here from God seems to be, it's not that at all. It has to do with beingness. It has to do with what we do. That starts to get at what you're asking for, Moses, in terms of experiencing my presence. So this notion about in the face of anxiety and separation and despair, that what our tradition is encouraging us to do is not to turn to something that is well-defined, that is stuck in some particular formulation, but instead to look at what we are doing or what the divine presence is doing. So here's in number 4. This is from the great mystical text, the Zohar. And this is very much about our holiday of Sukkot. And it's talking about the sukkah. When one sits in the sukkah of the shadow of faith, the Shekhinah spreads her wings over that person from above. And Abraham and 5 righteous ones and David with them dwell with that person. A person should rejoice each day of the festival with these guests. One must also gladden the poor, because the portion of these heavenly guests must go to the poor. If one sits in the shadow of faith and invites those heavenly guests and does not give their portion to the poor, the heavenly guests all depart. Here in this shelter, this liminal space that we call the sukkah, a space that's neither permanent, nor is it non-existent, nor does it expose us thoroughly to the outside. It is something that is temporary, and it is something, if we dwell within that, then this divine presence comes and spreads her wings over us, and other spiritual presences come and join us. But if we fail to do something, if we fail to take care of those who are in need, to take care of those who are outside, to take care of those who are in want, then that spiritual presence will vanish. So, you turn over, share with you this word from the prophet Zechariah. And if you remember this historical setting for the prophet Zechariah, Zechariah is a prophet who is there when the exiles return from Babylon, and they have been given the permission to rebuild the temple that the Babylonians had destroyed. And work on the temple begins, and then there's all this dissension among the Israelites. There are divisions that separate them out, political divisions, there are social divisions, there are economic divisions, and the work on the temple stops. And Zechariah is the prophet there in Jerusalem at the time. He doesn't say, everyone begin to pray more fervently, everyone bring sacrifices, everyone become more pious. No, these are the words that Zechariah speaks during this time of crisis when everything has come to a halting stop. The word of God to Zechariah continued. Thus said God of hosts, render true judgments, show kindness and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the orphan, the stranger, or the poor, and do not devise evil in your hearts against one another. And one of the great biblical commentators of our days, Protestant minister Walter Brueggemann, in his book, A Wilderness Zone, says this about what we've just read from the prophet Zechariah. There's nothing remarkable about this catalog of obligations, except that it is mouthed just at the cusp of homecoming. What he's referring to is that the exiles have just returned home, and they have this opportunity to rebuild and reunify themselves. And in fact, there were people who had never left, and there were people who had been taken into exile, and now they're being reunited and given the opportunity to reweave a fabric of an Israelite society, and they fail. They're divided among themselves. I think that's what he means by the cusp of the homecoming. And he says it's remarkable that it's at this moment that what the prophet reminds them to do is to care for one another, to care about those who are in need. They have to rededicate themselves to their covenantal fidelity and responsibility to one another. And that's what will spark a reunification of the community and a spirit of re-engaging in this rebuilding project that's not just about creating a building, but rebuilding a nation as well. So I'd like to share with you, if you take a look at this painting that's on the front, which is called Threshold. It's a painting by a Mexican artist, Eduardo Rodriguez Calzado. And let me share with you his artist statement, and then we'll look a little bit more closely at his painting. And here's what he wrote. I'm an artist obsessed with detail, expressing emotions through the fragmentation of color, capturing a great light in my artwork. In most of my paintings, I represent the human form or some sort of human element and our connection to another plane of consciousness. In my process of painting, I sometimes have a very clear image of what I want to represent. They are images that pop into my head, and that is what I put down on canvas. Other times I just work from a feeling and start putting forms and colors down, and later I look at it and find the story I want to tell. My hope is that whoever sees my paintings will take something away with them, even if it's just the spark of a memory or a feeling. And that is what great art does. It speaks to you through your emotions and changes you and the way you think and feel. I hope that I will be doing this for the rest of my life because I love to paint and the whole process of using my imagination to create fantastical imagery. So if we look at this painting, here's what at least I saw here. Around the periphery are fragments, if you will. They are geometric forms. They are parts of something that is whole. And they are, if you will, spinning around the periphery. And that in the middle of it is an act of defiance, if you will, against the fragmentation, against this bit of geometry that breaks things down into its constituent parts. In the middle, I see this wholeness, this circle, this bright light. And I think this is what our tradition is teaching us through these verses and this bit of commentary, which is that we experience so often in our lives a sense that everything has been fragmented. We're separated. We're apart from one another. We're apart from those we love and care about. Our communities may be broken up into segmented pieces with no sense of what brings it all together. And so what our tradition urges us to do when we begin to experience that is to begin to act in ways that cohere us together. Just begin to practice acts of neighborly obedience. And if we do that, then that bit of center, that bit of light will begin to shine ever more brightly, and we'll begin to experience the wholeness that we were really all a part of. And with that, I'd love to open it up and see what else you may have experienced in our readings and our looking at this painting and looking at what the verses have held for us. So let me begin by June, and then I'll go to Mark. So June, unmute and share with us.
When I saw this, it seemed to me this is the light at the end of a tunnel. And on the left-hand side, there's some defined squares, which could be portals, maybe doors leading in. And then in the center, you see a straight line, which could be a figure gravitating toward the light. That's what I see in the painting.
Lovely. I love the notion of seeing doors there and then seeing this tunnel. That's lovely. Thank you, June. Okay. And Mark Thompson.
Thank you, Rabbi. This portion presents kind of a conundrum for me. And getting back to your original question of why this particular Torah portion and what does it have to do with the Sukkah? And I couldn't come up with anything until I thought about the fact that Moses is hiding in the cleft of a rock. He's hiding from the presence of God. And yet he's wanting to experience God's presence, and yet he's feeling a sense of separation and abandonment. And then later on, when you're showing the Psalm of, there's the statement of the shadow of faith. Here again, we have the sense of a shadow, the sense of being somehow in the periphery. And then again, I mean, God appears as a cloud, another example of how he's showing his separateness. And yet we're asked to try to somehow identify with this presence, this beingness, which is deliberately trying to separate this beingness from us. So for me, that's kind of a conundrum. And then when I look at the painting, well, I see the light of God in the center, but I see these fragments, not so much as fragments, but as kind of a shadow. So it's a conundrum for me. And this notion of separateness, abandonment, and yet trying to strike an attachment it's a curious thing.
Lovely. Let me just quickly respond to some things, because you just excited me so much with what you shared. And in particular, you mentioned that Moses is in this cleft, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways in which one of the ways that we can read the story of Moses, and indeed, this is the way Aviva Zornberg in part wants us to read about Moses, is the extent of his own alienation from his people. I mean, he is someone who grew up in the palace, and he still has a sense of estrangement from them. He's really not of them, although he's a part of them. And so part of his own journey is working out this sense of his estrangement from the people that he is leading. So this notion about being in the cleft, there's another character in our Bible who also experiences God while in the cleft of a rock, and that's Elijah. And Elijah is another character who really has, in some sense, a sense of alienation from or separation from his own people, because he has such a profound sense of, well, he's almost a fanatic, is I guess one way of describing it. And he feels that he is the only one who can carry the true message of God. And so in this cleft of the rock, there's thunder, and there's a loud wind and everything. And it's not in that noise, it's not in that pounding vibration, that power that has the capacity to shatter that he experiences God. It's in the still, small
voice.
Okay. And one of the mythologies about Elijah is that he ascends to heaven without dying, and that he returns periodically in order to participate in such beautiful mitzvah as a bris, and is the one who's going to announce the coming of the Messiah. And some tradition views that as a great honor. But as we've discussed previously, that may be actually a form of rehabilitation for Elijah, to help him overcome his sense of fanaticism and estrangement. So here's that notion about the cleft of Moses, that sense of estrangement, and how that is also played out as a motif in the story about Elijah. So thank you very much for raising some of those issues. And I see so many hands. Let me call some hands that let me call upon Robert and Paul and Catherine, and then I'll get to Anna. So Robert, go ahead, please.
Yes, it's so nice to have you back and be with everyone. I have a very brief comment. It refers to an earlier comment you made about behavior. And my comment is that the essence of faith is fewness of words and abundance of deeds.
Amen.
Thank you, Robert. Very, and said in few words. Thank you so much. All right. So Paul and then Catherine, please.
Yeah, I connect, let's say, when I look at the picture, I see an intense, like very hot and maybe a really hot sauce, an air around it that's heated and rises. And so it has the idea of what you say about the presence or glory. So it has that feeling, if you want to. But now I want to give a different, since you're from New York, just came back, I want to give a different twist to that. And if I go back to the Hebrew, where it says na et, the kabod hakabodcha, whatever words are there, and the word kabod is honor. But the way I heard it, my father was trying to introduce me to find out if I was being a good salesman. He introduced me to the wholesaler selling dresses, and the first thing out of his mouth, he was questioning my father's kabodcha, which is basically saying, hey, I don't think you could pay for it. It was an expression of doubt. And so when I saw that word presence and I looked over to the word kabodcha, I just remembered how it was used in a street way, that kabodcha was not a glory or a presence. It was just a credit rating, hey, I'm a leader. And now you're the one that's leading me, Moses talking. And perhaps one interpretation is, what, I'm getting a little skeptical. There's been a lot, show me, that it's not a presence or a glory. It's just the opposite. Prove it to me. So, show kabodcha. So that I hang on that word, but my strength in Hebrew is very weak. It's street language that I was used to.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That introduces such a wonderful richness to the language. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Paul. Let me call on Catherine, and then I'm going to ask Anna. Go ahead, Catherine, unmute.
Yes. When I look at the painting and I want to build on something that Mark Thompson said, we can't really pinpoint the center. The center is not really visible to us. Instead, it's in our minds and our hearts.
Wow.
The way Adonai is in our minds and our hearts.
Wow. I mean, so that's lovely. So when you look at the center there, it's almost like you can't quite look in the center of the sun directly. It's just too powerful. Yeah, that's really lovely. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go back to Paul in a moment about this notion about kavod, but let me call upon Anna first.
Well, I do have one really favorite rabbi who said one thing that I always remember, and I love to repeat, so I will do it again, even though some of you have heard this. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Thank you, Rico. I got a fist bump from Rico on it. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, hospitality is more important even than the intimate experience of the presence of God. And he was a very wise man. And I see that the sukkah is where we share the face of God. You can't see my face. Maybe Moses couldn't see the face because there wasn't another face to reflect back to him. We become faces of God. We become welcomers. We become part of the family. We become, with Abraham, then the 5 righteous ones, and David and the guests. When we have guests into our home, in Sukkot, into our sukkah, we are doing the most and being, we are becoming being the most holy thing that we can be. We share through hospitality, communion with each other, and oneness. We can render true judgments. We show kindness and compassion. We don't oppress. And I think Sukkot is just one of the most lovely ways to get together and do that wonderful work.
Thank you, Anna. That's lovely. And Richard,
Yeah,
thank you.
I just a bunch of notes, but I don't want to go on too long, so I won't. But the thought occurs to me, what would make a human being believe that they were separated from God? This whole idea about separating, once that word is uttered, you're expecting something that's outside of your beingness. So I just think you look inside and know it's there and invite it to come in, and that's it. Quit looking for an object. Quit looking for some kind of wonderful experience you're going to have, because you're not going to be there when it happens, because it's coming from inside. Where is God? Where can God be but inside? When you start talking about it's outside, I'm forlorn, get over yourself. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Richard. And others, and if not, I'm going to go back to just a word that Paul brought into our conversation, where he talks about kavod, okay, which is here translated as presence, and it's first used here, but when Moses says, "Oh, let me behold your presence," and the word kavod that's used there, really, its real meaning, which is often translated as honor or presence, but at its root, it has to do with weight. It has something that is weighty. And we've come across this word before when we read about the 10 Commandments in Parshat Yitro, where we have this, kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, which is often translated as honor your mother and your father. And so what does it mean to honor your mother and your father? Does that mean you have to just show them respect and do whatever they say? Well, at its root, what it means is you have to give weight to this relationship, because if you're not grounded, if you're not understanding the gravity, the gravitational pull of being located in this world because of a mother and a father, then you're going to be free floating the rest of your life. You'll be detached. So you need to have a sense of being grounded by that particular relationship. And that sense of weight seems to be what Moses is desiring. He wants to have, it's the same word. He wants to have, let me behold the weightiness of you. And the response again from God is, actually what's going to happen is my weightiness is just going to pass right by you. And you won't even begin to experience me until after I'm past. And what you'll experience will be what's left, the trace elements of my presence. And the trace elements of my presence seem to be what God was saying earlier. What you're going to experience will be the trace elements, not of a weight, but the trace elements of the goodness that I've done. What you'll experience will be the grace that I grant, the compassion that I show. And that seems to be the lesson here that this God is trying to teach Moses. That's what this is all about. That's what you're commissioned to do. You're commissioned not to create golden calves. What you're commissioned to do is, no matter how difficult the moment, no matter how abandoned you might feel, no matter how despairing you might feel, practice compassion, practice taking care of one another. And if you practice those things,
You'll feel fulfilled.
then the light will shine, and you'll see the oneness that we all are.
Rabbi, your expression of weightiness is the I think that was the idea, that my father was not exactly the heavyweight in the business, and now you're bringing a lightweight in. So the word of kavod was honor, or weightiness was really the approach. So I really agree with what you just said.
Thank you. It's so lovely when we can weave together these moments in our lives and see that those moments in our lives are always with us. They're never gone. The lessons that we learned from 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 60, 70 years ago, they're still with us, right? And so that's the beauty of it all, is that the light never goes out. And these experiences never go away. And it's all a matter of how we process these experiences and what we learn from them, because we're always carrying them with us. So I want to thank all of you for being
Rabbi, your sound is off.
Did you turn it on?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Mhm.
Okay. I just want to thank everyone for creating a community of interpreters and a community of caring, compassionate people we help one another process these moments that sometimes seem so shattering. And when we discover in a holy community, we can discover that we have the capacity to heal these moments, and that love helps us to understand that nothing ever ends. It's just a matter of an ongoing flowingness. So with that, thank you so much, everyone. God bless you all. So glad to be with you again. Thank you again, Cantor Thompson, for carrying on the studies, and everyone for being a wonderful participant. Look forward to seeing you all at our next session. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.